Mom's voice sliced through the clinking of silverware like a cold knife. "You've always been such a disappointment, Emma. I just don't understand how you can be so content being a failure." The room went quiet. The only sounds left were the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the frantic, silent thumping of my own heart against my ribs. My sister, Olivia, who had been glued to her phone, actually looked up, her eyes wide with a kind of detached curiosity, like she was watching a mildly interesting scene in a movie. My father, a man who had perfected the art of becoming invisible, cleared his throat. It was a small, dry sound, a punctuation mark in a sentence he would never dare to speak aloud. He stared down at his half-eaten piece of roast beef as if it held the secrets to the universe. He never spoke up when Mom went on one of her tirades. Not once. I sat there, my hands folded neatly in my lap over the stiff linen napkin. I forced my fingers to remain steady, to not tremble, to not betray the storm that was gathering inside me. Under the heavy oak table, my heart was a wild drum, thundering a rhythm of hurt and rage. I focused on my breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. A trick my first and only therapist taught me years ago. It didn't make the pain go away, but it kept it from spilling out of my eyes. My name is Emma Carter, and I'm 30 years old. For most of those 30 years, I've felt like I was living life behind a pane of glass. I could see everyone else, and they could see me, but we could never quite connect. The world was loud and colorful, and I was muted. My volume turned down so low I sometimes wondered if I was there at all. Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you are watching from. I've been called a disappointment by my family so many times that the word had started to lose its meaning. It was just a sound my mother made, like a sigh or a cough. It was part of the soundtrack of my life, the background noise to every family gathering, every holiday, every phone call. The sting had faded over the years, leaving a dull, permanent ache in its place. It almost stopped hurting, almost. But that night was different. The word wasn't just background noise. It wasn't a casual sigh of disapproval. She had aimed it. She had sharpened it. She threw that word, failure, like a poisoned dart across the dinner table. And for the first time, I didn't try to dodge it. I let it hit me. I felt the venom of it seep into my skin, cold and sharp. And in that moment of impact, something inside me broke. Or maybe something was finally born. That night, the night Mom served her judgment alongside the pot roast, was also the night I stopped letting her define me. It was the night I decided to turn up my own volume. I sat there, looking at her face, flushed with self-righteousness, and at my sister's faint, pitying smirk. I looked at my father, a ghost at his own dinner table. I saw them all so clearly, maybe for the first time. They weren't a family sitting around me. They were a panel of judges who had delivered their verdict long ago. But a verdict is only powerful if you accept it. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. A blank canvas they could project all their assumptions onto. They saw the quiet daughter, the boring daughter, the one who worked some little job on her computer and never had anything exciting to share. The failure, that's what they saw. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that her perfectly decorated life, the very table we were sitting at, the food on her plate, had been entirely funded by the failure sitting directly across from her. And the silence I had kept for 5 long years was about to come to a very, very loud end. My sister, Olivia, has always been the sun. It's not just a metaphor. It was a physical reality in our house. When she walked into a room, the energy shifted. My mother's attention would snap towards her like a plant bending towards the light. My father would put down his newspaper. Everything and everyone reoriented around her. I, in turn, learned to live in the shadows she cast, where it was quiet and safe, but also cold. She was born with a sparkle that drew people in, a natural, effortless charm that made everything she did seem magical. I remember when we were in high school, there was a week that perfectly captured our dynamic. I had won the state-level mathematics competition. It was a huge deal for me. I'd studied for months, giving up my weekends to solve complex equations until my brain ached. I came home clutching a small, heavy trophy and a certificate, my heart buzzing with a pride that felt foreign and wonderful. I walked into the living room and my mom was on the phone. I held up the trophy, beaming. She just put a finger to her lips, shushing me, and continued her conversation. When she finally hung up, she glanced at my award and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Put it on the shelf." The very next day, Olivia came home and announced she had been voted homecoming queen. Our house exploded. My mother shrieked with joy and immediately started calling relatives. My dad went out and bought a bottle of sparkling cider for a celebratory toast. That weekend, they threw a massive party for her. The house was filled with balloons and cheering friends. Olivia stood in the center of the living room, wearing her sash and crown, glowing. At one point, my mom clinked a glass for a toast. "To my beautiful daughter, Olivia," she said, her voice thick with emotion. She was born to shine. I've always known she was destined for wonderful things. I stood in the corner, holding a cup of lukewarm cider, and watched my small, heavy trophy on the bookshelf get buried under a pile of discarded party napkins. That was the moment I understood. My achievements were quiet and academic. They were black and white, lines on a page. Olivia's were loud and shiny. They came with crowns and applause. In our family, only the shiny things mattered. Her adult life became an extension of that high school coronation. She chose a job at a high-end clothing boutique called Ember and Ash, not because she needed the money, but because she liked the aesthetic. It was a perfect backdrop for her real job, social media influencer. Her Instagram feed was a masterclass in curated perfection. One day, she'd post a picture of herself artfully arranging flowers in a vase, captioned, "Finding beauty in the simple things. Mindfulness, bloom where you are planted." The next day, it would be a candid-looking shot of her laughing on a city street, text overlaid with an inspirational quote about chasing your dreams. My mother was her most ardent follower. She treated Olivia's Instagram like the morning news. "Emma, did you see Olivia's post this morning?" She'd ask me over the phone, her voice filled with a reverence that baffled me. "That beautiful white dress she was wearing?" She said in the caption that it's all about creating the life you want. She's just so wise for her age. So many people commented saying how she inspires them. I would scroll through the pictures, a knot tightening in my stomach. I saw the comments. "You're an icon. OMG, so stunning." And there, always near the top, was my mother's comment. "That's my beautiful, talented daughter, shining bright as always. Love, Mom." She had never once, in the 5 years I had been running my business, commented on a single post I made on my professional LinkedIn page. She probably didn't even know it existed. My life was the polar opposite of Olivia's curated feed. It was real, and it was messy. My office was a spare bedroom with 2 large monitors, a comfortable but ugly ergonomic chair, and stacks of files that threatened to take over. My version of finding beauty in the simple things was locating a critical error in a client's sprawling spreadsheet that saved them thousands of dollars. My version of chasing my dreams involved working until midnight to meet a tax deadline, my hair in a messy bun, and my eyes burning from staring at the screen. There was nothing glamorous about it. It was just hard, relentless work. But my ambition was a quiet furnace, burning hot and steady inside me. It wasn't for show. It was for me. It was the deep, bone-deep satisfaction of building something from nothing, of being respected by my clients, of knowing that I was not just capable, but exceptional at what I did. But because my mother couldn't take a pretty picture of a reconciled balance sheet, she couldn't see it. Because it didn't sparkle, it didn't exist. I once overheard her talking to one of her friends at a family barbecue. The friend had asked what I was up to. "Oh, Emma," my mom said with a sigh, loud enough for me to hear from the patio. "She does some sort of computer bookkeeping thing. She's always been such a homebody. She's happy in her little bubble, I suppose." Not everyone can be a go-getter like Olivia. A little bubble. She had no idea. My little bubble was a thriving business with a roster of national clients. My little bubble was about to clear 7 figures in annual revenue. My little bubble was the only thing keeping the roof over her head. But in the grand family narrative, I was cast as the quiet, unambitious one. And Olivia, with her sponsored posts and borrowed glamour, was the star. A star whose light, ironically, was being paid for by the shadows I worked in. The financial support began not as a conscious decision, but as a series of emergencies. It was like stepping into quicksand, one small step to help, and then another. And before I knew it, I was up to my neck. And they were all standing on solid ground, telling me to be careful. The first time was 5 years ago, after Dad lost his job at the hardware distribution center. The layoff gutted him. He'd worked there since I was in kindergarten. It wasn't just a job. It was his entire social circle, his routine, his identity. For weeks, he just sat in his recliner, the gray light of the television flickering across his unshaven face. He looked like a ship that had lost its anchor, just drifting. The first late notice for the mortgage arrived, a stark white envelope with a red border. I saw it on the kitchen counter when I came over for my weekly Sunday visit. My mother snatched it away and shoved it in a drawer, her movements sharp and angry, but I'd already seen it. The atmosphere in the house was suffocating. Later that evening, after a tense, mostly silent dinner, my dad walked me to my car. He stood there, his shoulders slumped, kicking at a loose piece of gravel on the driveway. "Things are a little tight right now, Em," he mumbled, his eyes fixed on the ground. The shame rolling off him was a palpable thing. It hurt to watch. This was my father, the man who had always seemed so strong, so capable. "It's okay, Dad," I said, my voice gentle. "Let me help. Seriously, I can cover it." No, he said, shaking his head. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering," I insisted. That night, I went home and transferred the mortgage payment. It was $1,642. My own checking account, which I had been so proud of building up, suddenly looked small and fragile. But the wave of relief that washed over me when I thought of my dad's face made it feel worth it. He called the next day. "Thank you, Emma," he whispered. "You're a good girl. We'll pay you back, I swear." That was the first promise. It was the beginning of a long line of them, all broken. The one-time payment became a monthly occurrence. It was just easier for me to set up an automatic draft than to watch them go through the shame of asking every 4 weeks. They accepted it with a kind of quiet resignation. It became our new normal. The next crisis was my mother's. She found solace in shopping. When she was stressed, she bought things. New shoes, expensive kitchen gadgets, clothes she would wear once. It was a habit they couldn't afford even when my dad was working. Without his income, it was catastrophic. She called me one afternoon, her voice a high-pitched panic. "Emma, I'm at the grocery store, and my debit card was declined. And then my credit card, too. I don't understand. There must be a mistake with the bank. Could you possibly send me a little money? Just to cover the groceries?" "I'm so embarrassed. Everyone is staring." I knew it wasn't a mistake with the bank. I logged into her credit card account. She'd given me the password years ago to help her keep track of it, and saw the truth. It was maxed out. Thousands of dollars in charges from department stores and online boutiques. She hadn't just been buying groceries. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "the card is maxed out. You've spent over $5,000 this month." A sob caught in her throat. "I know," she whispered. I've been so stressed." "Don't tell your father." "Please, Emma, can you just help me this one time? I'll pay it all back. I'll get a part-time job." Against my better judgment, I paid off the entire balance. The $5,000 felt like a punch to the gut. The part-time job never happened, but the calls continued. A few hundred here for a car repair, 1,000 there for an unexpected dental bill. Each time came with a frantic story and a hollow promise. Olivia's financial drama was always the most theatrical. Her little compact car, which she'd bought with a loan co-signed by my dad before he lost his job, was a constant source of trouble. One day she called me hysterical. "Emma, the car is making a horrible noise and there's smoke coming out. I'm stranded on the side of the highway. I think it's going to explode." It wasn't going to explode. It needed a new transmission, a repair that cost $3,000. She didn't have 300, let alone 3,000. "I'll lose my job, Emma. How will I get to work? My whole life is over." She wailed into the phone, so I paid for it. As I typed in my bank details, my hand was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, simmering anger. All the while, my business was growing at a speed that almost scared me. I had started out alone in my spare room, building a client list one small business at a time. The turning point was when I designed a streamlined bookkeeping system for a local restaurant. The owner was so impressed he recommended me to every other restaurant owner he knew. Suddenly, my reputation spread. I was the girl who could untangle any financial mess, who could make sense of chaos. I hired my first contractor, a woman named Sarah who was a stay-at-home mom with a master's in accounting. Then I hired another and another. We were a small, remote team of quiet, competent women. My little job now had payroll, health benefits, and a quarterly tax bill in the 5 figures. I was a CEO. I was managing a team and a portfolio of clients across 3 states. I kept it all a secret. I never corrected my mom when she called it my little computer thing. I let Olivia believe I was scraping by. I did it because I knew the truth wouldn't bring me respect. It would only bring bigger requests. My success wasn't something to be celebrated. It was a resource to be consumed. They had come to depend on my money completely, but they did it without ever acknowledging where it came from. They took my help as their due, while simultaneously looking down on the very work that made it possible. They lived in a house of cards I had built, all while telling me I didn't know how to play the game. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, a day when I was feeling particularly accomplished. I had just finished a video conference with a new high-profile client, a chain of boutique hotels on the West Coast. We had finalized a 6-figure contract, and I was sitting at my desk, allowing myself a rare moment of quiet satisfaction. The sun was streaming through my office window, and for a moment, everything felt possible. Then my phone buzzed, and my mother's name appeared on the screen. The small, warm feeling in my chest instantly vanished, replaced by a familiar sense of dread. I ignored the first call, letting it roll to voicemail, a small act of defiance. But she called back immediately, her signature move. It meant this wasn't a casual chat. This was a summons. I took a deep breath and answered. Emma, honey, hello. Her voice was a confection of forced cheerfulness. It was a voice I had learned to distrust. It was the voice she used right before she asked for something, or right before she delivered a criticism wrapped in the guise of love. I was just thinking we haven't had a proper family dinner in ages. Life just gets so busy, doesn't it? I'm making my pot roast on Saturday. You have to come. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. A proper family dinner was a euphemism for my biannual performance review, where my life choices were evaluated and invariably found wanting. Oh, I don't know, Mom, I said, my voice carefully neutral. I stared at the signed contract on my desk, a tangible symbol of a success I couldn't share. This is a really busy time for me. I have a lot of end-of-quarter reports to finalize. Nonsense, she bulldozed, the sweetness in her voice curdling slightly. You're always busy with that little computer thing of yours. You'll work your whole life away if you're not careful. You need a break. You need to be with your family. Besides, Olivia has some wonderful news to share. Of course she did. We'll see you at 7 on Saturday. Don't be late. She hung up. There was no room for negotiation. My presence wasn't requested. It was required. The rest of the week was tainted by the impending dinner. A gray cloud of anxiety followed me from room to room. I found myself snapping at a contractor over a minor error, something I never do. I couldn't focus. I'd be staring at a spreadsheet, and my mind would drift to past dinners, a highlight reel of insults and dismissals playing in my head. Are you ever going to find a real job, Emma? Why can't you be more outgoing like your sister? That blouse is a little drab, don't you think? On Saturday evening, the ritual of getting ready felt like preparing for battle. I stood in front of my closet, not looking for an outfit, but for armor. Something that could deflect verbal blows. I chose a pair of tailored black trousers, a simple navy silk blouse, and a sharp, structured blazer. It was professional, understated, and screamed, I am not a child. I put on an extra layer of mascara, hoping it would make me look formidable rather than just tired. As I drove over, I rehearsed conversations in my head, planning neutral topics I could steer the conversation towards. The weather, a new show on Netflix, anything but my life or Olivia's. Pulling into the driveway of the house I was paying for always sent a jolt of bitter irony through me. I had refinanced it in my own name 2 years ago when the bank was threatening to foreclose, a fact my parents were conveniently unaware of. As far as they knew, some anonymous bank angel had just given them a better rate. I walked in, and the scene was exactly as I had pictured. The warm, inviting smell of pot roast filled the air, a stark contrast to the cold tension underneath. The table was set with the good china and the silverware I had bought them for Christmas. My mother, wearing a new cashmere sweater, a recent purchase from a credit card I'd just paid off, greeted me with a kiss that didn't quite land on my cheek. Emma, you're here, she said, her eyes doing a swift, critical inventory of my appearance. You look so serious all the time. You should try a little color. It would brighten you up. There it was. The first jab, not even 30 seconds in. Olivia was draped gracefully on the couch, looking bored and beautiful. She was texting, and only glanced up long enough to give me a lazy, hey. My dad was in his recliner, a ghost in his own home, and he offered me a weak, distracted smile before turning his attention back to the TV. I sat on the edge of an armchair, my purse clutched in my lap like a shield. I felt like an anthropologist studying a strange hostile tribe I just happened to be related to. They offered me a glass of water, while Olivia was served a glass of expensive-looking wine. The small talk was excruciating. They asked Olivia about her job, her friends, her upcoming trip that I didn't yet know about. They asked me if traffic was bad on the way over. The message was clear. Her life was a story worth hearing. Mine was just logistics. I braced myself. The main event, the dinner itself, was about to begin. We sat down at the dinner table, the flickering candlelight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. For a few minutes, the only sounds were the scraping of forks against china and my mother's polite inquiries about whether the roast was tender enough. The piece was thin and fragile, like a sheet of ice over deep, cold water. I knew it wouldn't last. It was Olivia who broke it. She placed her fork down with a delicate clink and sighed, a calculated sound designed to capture everyone's attention. Oh my gosh, I am just so excited. I feel like I'm going to burst, she declared to the room. Brandon is just the most amazing man on the planet. My mother immediately put her own fork down, her expression transforming into one of pure, rapturous adoration. What did he do now, sweetie? Tell us everything. He surprised me with a trip, Olivia announced, her voice a symphony of feigned surprise and genuine glee. A full week in Cabo. He booked the presidential suite at that resort I've been dreaming of. Mom, the one with the private beach and the infinity pool. He said I've been working so hard I deserve to be spoiled. My mother's face lit up as if Olivia had just announced she'd cured a major disease. Oh, my darling girl. That's absolutely wonderful, she gushed, reaching across the table to clasp Olivia's hand. I am so proud of you. You see, when you put that kind of positive, successful energy out into the universe, it comes back to you. You work so hard, and you manifest such a beautiful life for yourself. You deserve every single good thing that happens to you. I took a sip of my water, the ice cubes clinking against the glass. Olivia's version of working so hard consisted of 20-hour weeks spent convincing wealthy women to buy $500 handbags. But in my mother's eyes, she was a titan of industry. The praise was so thick and effusive it was almost comical. Then, as always, the pendulum swung. After exhausting every possible compliment for Olivia, my mother's gaze landed on me. The brilliant smile faded from her face, replaced by a familiar, heavy look of disappointment. The air grew colder. You could learn a thing or two from your sister, Emma, she said, her voice now devoid of its earlier warmth. It was flat and clinical, as if delivering a diagnosis. When are you going to start doing something with your life? The question, so absurd and so deeply insulting, landed like a physical blow. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the blood rush to my face. My father froze, his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes darting from my mother to me and back again before retreating to the safety of his plate. Olivia watched me over the rim of her wine glass, her eyes gleaming with a kind of cruel amusement. This was her favorite part of the show. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady. I'm doing fine, Mom. Fine? She scoffed, the word dripping with disdain. You're not fine, Emma. You're just existing. You sit in that spare room all day, you tap on your computer, and then you watch TV at night. Is that a life? It's not too late to go back to school, you know, to find a real career. I raised 2 daughters. One of them is out there thriving, living a big, beautiful life. She paused for dramatic effect, her eyes locking onto mine. And one of them is just surviving. Surviving. The word echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of the room. It was the cruelest thing she had ever said to me. All the other insults, all the dismissals and comparisons, they were just scratches. This was a deep, deliberate wound. Surviving. As if I were a stray animal she pitied. As if I were clinging to the edges of life by a thread. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just snap, it shattered. The years of quiet resentment, of swallowed anger, of biting my tongue until it bled, it all just crumbled into dust. The hurt was still there, but it was now encased in a thick, protective layer of ice-cold rage. My eyes slowly panned across the scene. I looked at the expensive bottle of wine Olivia was drinking, a brand I knew cost over $50, which she'd probably put on my mother's credit card. I looked at the gleaming hardwood floors, which I had paid to have refinished last year as a birthday gift to my dad. I looked at the very plate my mother was eating from, part of a designer set I had ordered for her after she'd broken most of the old ones in a fit of pique. Everything in my line of sight was a lie. It was all propped up by me, by the daughter who was just surviving. The irony was so bitter, so profound, it almost made me laugh. They had no idea. They sat here in their comfortable, curated lives, passing judgment on the very person who was funding the whole charade. I lowered my gaze from their faces and looked at my purse, which was resting on the floor beside my chair. Inside it was a thick white envelope. I had prepared it weeks ago, in a moment of foresight, a moment just like this one that I knew was inevitable. I had called it my emergency exit. A cold, calm resolve settled over me. The emergency was here. The show was over. The lights were about to come on and they were going to hate what they saw. My hand, feeling both heavy and light, reached down for my purse. The movement was unhurried, a slow-motion sequence in the tableau of our frozen family dinner. Every eye was on me, a spectrum of emotions playing out on their faces. My mother's irritation, my sister's bored contempt, my father's anxious confusion. The small click of the magnetic clasp on my purse opening was like the cocking of a gun in the dead quiet room. My fingers, surprisingly steady, brushed past my wallet and keys, finding the crisp, familiar edge of the 9 by 12-inch envelope. I drew it out. It was plain white, with no markings, a blank slate onto which I was about to project the last 5 years of my life. I placed it on the table between my plate and my mother's, the soft thud a declaration that the evening's regularly scheduled programming was now over. My mother stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice retaining a sliver of its usual authority, though a tremor of uncertainty ran through it. "Emma, if this is some kind of stunt, I am not in the mood." "Don't be dramatic." From her seat, Olivia let out a long, put-upon sigh. She rolled her eyes so extravagantly it was a work of performance art. "Oh, here we go," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Couldn't stand me having one nice thing, could you? You always have to make everything about you." I didn't even look at her. My entire focus, my entire will was a laser beam pointed directly at my mother. My voice, when I spoke, was alien to my own ears. It was a voice I had never used before, devoid of pleading, of defensiveness, of the desperate need to be understood. It was the voice of a CEO presenting a final, unassailable report. "Since we're all so very interested in the state of my life," I began, my words dropping like stones into the silent pool of the room. "And since you've brought up the topic of thriving versus surviving, I thought it was time we reviewed the family's finances. I think you'll find them very illuminating." My mother's lips thinned into a hard line. "That is none of your business." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong," I said, a chilling calm washing over me. "It's been my business for a very long time." I opened the unsealed flap of the envelope and began to pull out the contents. I had spent an entire Sunday afternoon preparing this, printing, sorting, and paper-clipping each document into its own damning category. This was not a moment of impulse. It was the execution of a contingency plan I had prayed I would never need. The first, slimmest stack I slid across the table to my father. It landed softly next to his bread plate. "These," I said, tapping the top page with my index finger, "are the mortgage statements for this house. We'll just focus on the last 18 months for simplicity's sake." He fumbled for the reading glasses in his shirt pocket, his hands shaking so much it took him 2 tries to get them on his face. He picked up the top sheet, his eyes scanning the columns of numbers. "You'll see the monthly amount due at the top," I continued, my voice that of a patient, meticulous teacher. "And you'll see the payment confirmation at the bottom, but the most important part is the source account. It's listed right there. An automatic draft from a commercial account with Nashville First Bank." I let that sink in. They didn't even know what city my business was legally registered in. "The account is under the name Carter Financial Solutions, LLC. That's my company, Dad, and I am the sole proprietor." I watched his face as he processed the information. It was like watching a building crumble in slow motion. The denial, the confusion, the dawning horror, and finally, the deep, gut-wrenching shame. He looked from the paper to me, his mouth agape, a silent question in his eyes. I remembered the day I'd set it all up. I was in a lawyer's office, signing the refinance papers that put the house in my name to secure a better rate, the loan officer congratulating me on my company's impressive financials. I had felt sick with a combination of guilt for deceiving them and rage that it was necessary. I looked at my father now and saw not a patriarch, but a co-conspirator in my long, silent humiliation. Next, I turned to my mother. I took out a much thicker stack, bound with a thick rubber band, and placed it squarely in front of her. "And these, Mom, are your credit card statements, both the Visa and the American Express, for the last 2 years. She recoiled as if I'd thrown a live scorpion on the table. She wouldn't touch them. "You don't have to touch them," I said, my voice still unnervingly calm. "I can summarize. On page 3 of last April's Visa statement, you'll find the charges for that rejuvenating weekend you took at the Mountain View Spa, almost $2,000. On page 7 of this January's Amex statement, you'll find the charge for the cashmere sweater you're wearing right now, $350. There are charges from restaurants I've never heard of, boutiques you told me you were just window shopping in, and a recurring charge for a Wine of the Month club." I paused, letting the details paint a picture of her secret life, a life lived on my dime. "For 2 years, you've been telling me you were getting a handle on things. What you were actually doing was maxing out these cards every month, and I was the one receiving the frantic alerts from the credit company. And every month, like clockwork, I paid them off, in full, from my business account." Finally, I turned my attention to my sister, who had gone from smug to silent and pale. Her eyes were wide, darting between me and the papers on the table. I took the last stack and slid it across to her. It wasn't as thick as my mother's, but it was just as damning. "And, Olivia," I said, "these are for you." She flinched. "I don't want them." "You need to see them," I insisted. "These are the payment records for your car loan. I believe the story you told me was that your boyfriend, Brandon, was helping you out. That you were handling it together. But you weren't, were you? You missed 3 payments in a row last summer. The bank called Dad, not you, because he was the original cosigner. They were going to repossess it. He called me panicking, begging me not to tell you or Mom because he didn't want to upset anyone. He asked me to please just make the payments. He swore it would only be for a month or two until you got back on your feet. I shook my head slowly. It's been 14 months, Olivia. I've made every single payment. The room was no longer just silent. It was a vacuum. The air was gone. We were suspended in a moment of pure, unadulterated truth, and it was ugly and suffocating. It was Olivia who tried to claw her way out first, her voice a ragged whisper. "You're lying." She looked desperately at our parents for support. "She's making it all up. She's jealous of me and Brandon. She always has been. She probably faked all of these on her computer." I almost felt pity for her. It was the only defense she had. To believe I was a pathetic, jealous liar was infinitely less painful than accepting the truth that she was a fraud, living a life propped up by the sister she scorned. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. "I'm not lying," I said, my voice as solid as granite. "The routing number for my business account is on the bottom of every single payment confirmation. So is the phone number for my bank. I invite you to call them. Right now." "I'll wait." I leaned back in my chair. The trap had been sprung. The evidence was presented. And as I watched their faces contort with disbelief and shame, I knew there was no escape. My father was the first to fully break. He picked up the mortgage statement again, his hand trembling so violently the paper rattled. He looked at me, his face a mess of confusion and shame, as if he were a child who had been caught in a lie he didn't fully understand. "This can't be right," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Just on the house. This is more than $40,000. The number hung in the air. A monstrous, unbelievable sum that he couldn't wrap his head around. I looked at him, my expression unyielding. For years, I had softened my edges for him, made myself smaller to protect his fragile pride. That was over. He needed to see the full, unvarnished picture. "Try closer to $68,000, Dad," I stated, my voice clinical and precise, like an accountant reading a final tally. The number landed with a heavy thud in the dead silence of the room. I watched as their minds tried to grapple with it. $68,000. It was more than my dad's severance package. It was almost as much as the remaining balance on their mortgage. It was an impossible number and it had come from me. That's not possible," my mother finally choked out, shaking her head in frantic denial. Her eyes were wide with a kind of wild terror. "Where would you get that kind of money? Your little computer job?" "It's not a little computer job, Mom," I said, and for the first time, I allowed a sliver of the monumental effort, the sheer, back-breaking work of the last 5 years, to show in my voice. "It's a company, a legitimate, registered, tax-paying company. It's called Carter Financial Solutions. I started it from nothing 5 years ago, at the same kitchen table you're sitting at right now, with a used laptop and one client who paid me $200 a month." I leaned forward, planting my hands on the table. I wanted them to see me, to really see me, for the first time. While Olivia was building her social media following, I was building a business plan. While you were going to brunch, I was taking online courses in corporate tax law. While you were all watching movies at night, I was on the phone with clients on the West Coast, working until 2 in the morning, sometimes falling asleep at my desk. I took all the money I made and poured it back into the business, hiring good people, building a reputation for being the absolute best at what I do. We don't just do the books, Mom. We handle financial strategy for companies that are worth millions of dollars. My little computer job has a payroll that I am responsible for every 2 weeks. I am responsible for the livelihoods of 6 other women and their families. I let that sink in, the weight of a responsibility they could never comprehend. Then I delivered the final killing blow. My company is what generated the $68,000 that I have spent keeping this family from falling apart. While you were calling me a failure, you were in fact my single largest and most unprofitable expense. A choked sob escaped from Olivia. Her face, blotchy and tear-streaked, was twisted in disbelief. "Why?" she cried, the question an accusation. "If all of this was true, why didn't you ever say anything? Why would you hide all of that?" A bitter, weary smile touched my lips. I looked at each of them in turn, forcing them to meet my gaze. "Why?" I repeated softly. "Because you wouldn't have listened. Because you didn't want to know. Because my success was inconvenient for you." I turned to Olivia. "Do you remember my first year of college when I made the dean's list for the first time? I was so proud. I called home to tell you, and you interrupted me to complain for 20 minutes about a fight you were having with your boyfriend. You never once said congratulations." I turned to my mother. "Do you remember the day I graduated with my accounting degree? Summa cum laude. You spent the entire celebratory lunch talking about how Olivia was thinking of taking a pottery class because it was so important to be creative and well-rounded. You never once mentioned my honors. It was as if it hadn't happened. I turned to my father. And you, Dad, do you remember when I got my first office space? It was just a tiny rented room, but it was a huge step for me. I invited you all to come see it. You said you were too busy because you had to help Olivia move a new couch into her apartment. You never rescheduled. My voice grew stronger with each remembered slight, each casual dismissal. You're asking me why I didn't say anything? I tried. I tried for years in 100 small ways to show you who I was. And every single time you showed me that you weren't interested. You had your roles for us. Olivia was the star, the beautiful, exciting one. And I was the background character, the reliable, boring, sensible one. The failure. My success didn't fit into your neat little boxes. A world where I was the successful one and Olivia was the one struggling would have upended your entire worldview. So you just edited me out. You ignored the evidence. You didn't ask questions because you were afraid of the answers. I sat back. My speech finished. The air was thick with the ghosts of 1,000 unspoken truths. I didn't say anything because I knew it wouldn't earn me your respect. It would only increase your expectations. I didn't say anything because you had made it abundantly clear over and over again that my successes were irrelevant, but my bank account was essential. The silence that followed my indictment was profound. It was the sound of 3 people being forced to confront a version of themselves they didn't recognize and didn't want to accept. They were no longer a family. They were 3 separate individuals, shipwrecked on the island of a truth they couldn't escape. It was my mother who tried to piece together a lifeboat from the wreckage. She shook her head, a gesture of frantic negation, as if she could physically will my words away. No, she said, her voice brittle. No, it wasn't like that. We were always proud of you, Emma. We worried. We thought you were isolating yourself. All that time on your computer, it didn't seem healthy. We were just trying to motivate you, to push you to be more, to live a bigger life. It was the most pathetic, transparent excuse I had ever heard. To frame years of relentless criticism and emotional neglect as a misguided attempt at motivation was an insult to my intelligence. Motivate me? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. You think calling me a failure in front of my entire family was your way of motivating me? You think telling your friends I lived in a little bubble was supposed to inspire me? You think ignoring every single one of my accomplishments while celebrating Olivia for breathing was your way of showing you cared? I gave a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. No, Mom, you weren't motivating me. You were reinforcing your own narrative. You needed me to be the failure so you could feel better about Olivia being your masterpiece. It was never about me. It was always about you. My mother's face crumpled. The lie was too big to sustain. She had no defense left. At that moment, the fragile alliance of my family shattered completely. Olivia turned on my father, her face contorted with a rage born of humiliation. You knew about this? She shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at him. You knew she was paying for my car and you let me believe it was being handled? You let me sit here while she called me a charity case? My father, who had been trying to shrink into nothingness, was now pinned by her fury. I didn't want to worry you, Liv, he stammered. I was going to pay her back. Pay her back with what? My mother cut in, her voice suddenly venomous as she turned on him. With your part-time job greeting people at the door? This is your fault. If you hadn't lost your job, none of this would have happened. My fault? My dad shot back, a flicker of his old self returning in a wave of defensive anger. You're the one who couldn't stop spending. You're the one with the credit cards and the secret shopping trips. They were at each other's throats, a flurry of accusations and resentments that had clearly been simmering for years. It was ugly and raw. Olivia was crying hysterically, my mother was yelling, and my father was shouting back. It was chaos, and I just sat there watching them. I was no longer a part of it. I was an observer watching this dysfunctional tableau play out. The pain that had defined my relationship with them for so long was gone, replaced by a profound and final sense of detachment. It was like watching a building being demolished. It was loud and violent, but it was also a necessary clearing of the ground. Slowly, calmly, I stood up. The movement cut through their argument, and they all fell silent, turning to look at me. I began to gather the papers from the table, my movements methodical. The mortgage statements, the credit card bills, the car loan payments, my life's work, reduced to a stack of evidence. I slid them back into the envelope. Emma, wait, my father pleaded, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a desperate panic. Don't go, we can fix this. There's nothing to fix, I said, my voice soft but firm. There's only what's true, and we all know the truth now. I turned and walked towards the front hall. Each step felt lighter than the last. With every footfall, I was shedding years of their expectations, their judgments, their crushing weight. I passed the little table in the entryway where a framed photo of Olivia as homecoming queen sat. I didn't even glance at it. It was just an artifact from a life that was no longer mine. I reached the front door, my hand closing around the cool brass knob. This was it. The final step across the threshold into my own life. Emma. My mother's voice was a raw cry of desperation from the dining room. It stopped me in my tracks. It was the sound of someone watching their entire world slip over a cliff. I paused for a long moment, my back still to them. I could have just walked out. I owed them nothing. But some part of me needed to hear the end of the sentence. "What are we supposed to do now?" she wailed, the question hanging in the air, thick with selfish terror. There it was. Not, "How can we make this right?" Not, "We are so sorry." But, "How will we survive without our host?" I turned around slowly, deliberately. I looked at the three of them, a tableau of ruin. My hysterical sister, my defeated father, my terrified mother. They looked small and weak, stripped of the power they had always held over me. I met my mother's eyes. There were no tears in mine. My gaze was clear and steady. The war inside me was finally over. "You'll figure it out," I said, and my voice was not cruel, nor was it forgiving. It was simply a statement of fact, a final, irrevocable truth, just like your failure daughter did. Then I turned, opened the door, and walked out into the cool, clean air of the night, closing it softly behind me. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The first month of silence was the loudest. Every time my phone buzzed, my entire nervous system would seize, bracing for the inevitable incoming salvo of rage, guilt, or pleading. My body was conditioned to expect their chaos, and its absence was a phantom limb, an unnerving void where a constant ache used to be. I deleted their numbers from my contacts, not out of spite, but as an act of self-preservation, a digital boundary I desperately needed. I felt like a soldier returning from a war that only I knew I had been fighting, my ears still ringing from explosions no one else could hear. But as the days turned into weeks, the phantom ringing began to fade. The silence started to change its shape. It was no longer an empty void, but a vast open space. It was the space to think my own thoughts without them being filtered through the lens of their potential disapproval. It was the space to make a decision, big or small, without running it through a mental calculation of how they might react. It was the space to simply be. The decision to leave my hometown was not difficult. It was a foregone conclusion. The town itself felt haunted by the ghost of the person I used to be. Every street corner, every coffee shop held a memory of me making myself smaller, quieter, less. 2 months after that final dinner, I put my apartment into storage, packed my car with everything that mattered, and drove 8 hours south to Nashville. I had chosen the city because one of my biggest clients was headquartered there. But the real reason was simpler. It was a place where no one knew my name. Finding my house was a moment of pure serendipity. It was a small, brick, craftsman-style home in a neighborhood with old trees and wide sidewalks. It had a porch swing and a little backyard that was mostly weeds, but I saw its potential. I walked through the empty rooms, the afternoon sun slanting through the dusty windows, and I knew this was it. I paid for it in cash, the entire sum transferred in a single, clean transaction. There were no loans, no co-signers, no one to thank or be indebted to. The day I closed, the realtor handed me the keys, and I sat in my empty living room on the floor and cried. They weren't tears of sadness or even joy. They were tears of release. I had finally bought something that no one could take from me, a piece of the world that was entirely mine. My business, which had always been my secret refuge, now became my source of visible strength. Freed from the constant low-level stress of my family, my mind was sharper, more focused. I had more energy, more creativity. I finally rented a small, beautiful office space in a converted warehouse downtown, with exposed brick walls and huge windows. It felt momentous to have a place to go to work, a physical separation between my professional and personal life that I had never had before. I also began to build a different kind of family, my team. I hired 3 more women, expanding our capacity. One of them, Sarah, a single mom with a genius-level grasp of forensic accounting, became a close friend. We'd have lunch once a week, and our conversations were a revelation. She would ask me about my business strategy, my 5-year plan. She'd listen to my ideas and offer brilliant ones of her own. She saw me as a leader, a mentor, a peer. She saw me as I was. One afternoon, she told me, "You've built something incredible. Emma, you should be so proud. Hearing those words from someone I respected, spoken with genuine admiration, felt more validating than any approval I had ever craved from my family. Slowly, I began to build a personal life too. I started with small things. I bought a bright yellow armchair for my living room simply because the color made me happy, without a single thought to whether my mother would call it tacky. I adopted a scruffy terrier mix from a local shelter and named him Gus, the quiet companionship of a creature who wanted nothing from me but a warm place to sleep, and a scratch behind the ears was profoundly healing. I met Ben at a farmer's market. He was an architect who designed sustainable buildings, and he had a kind, quiet laugh that made me feel instantly at ease. Our first few dates were tentative, me navigating the unfamiliar territory of opening up to someone. On our fourth date, he asked me about my family. I took a deep breath and told him everything. The whole long, ugly story. I didn't edit or soften the details. I just laid it all out. He listened patiently, his eyes never leaving mine. When I was finished, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I expected him to pity me, or worse, to see me as damaged. Instead, he just reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "That's a heavy weight to carry for so long," he said, his voice gentle. "I'm just really glad you were strong enough to finally put it down." Strong enough. He saw my story not as one of victimhood, but as one of strength. It was a shift in perspective that changed everything. He was right. I wasn't the family failure. I was the family survivor. One evening, months later, I was on my back porch with Ben and Gus. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Gus was asleep at my feet, and Ben was telling me about a new project he was excited about. A feeling of deep, uncomplicated peace settled over me. It was a feeling I had never known before. It was the feeling of being home. My life wasn't loud or flashy. It wouldn't have made for a very exciting Instagram post. It was quiet. It was steady. It was real. And it was all mine. The silence from my family was no longer an absence. It was the sound of my own life, finally beginning. 8 months after the dinner, a letter arrived. It was in a plain white envelope, and my address was written in my mother's familiar, loopy cursive. My heart gave a single hard thump against my ribs, an involuntary echo of the past. For a moment I considered throwing it away unopened, but curiosity, and perhaps a need for a final, definitive period at the end of the sentence, made me carry it inside and slit it open with a kitchen knife. The letter was 2 pages long. It wasn't an apology, not a real one. A real apology would have involved taking responsibility, acknowledging the pain she had caused. This was something else. It was a carefully worded statement of regret for the situation, not for her actions. She wrote that she had been doing a lot of reflecting. That was her word. She wrote that they had been forced to sell the house, my house, and move into a small apartment. She mentioned that Olivia had to get a second job waiting tables because her boyfriend Brandon had left her shortly after her car was repossessed. She wrote these facts without emotion, as if reporting on the weather. Then came the part that was meant for me. "I didn't realize how much you were doing for us," she wrote. "I was proud of you in my own way. I just didn't know how to show it. I hope someday you'll be able to find it in your heart to forgive an old woman who just didn't understand." I read the letter twice, searching for any hint of genuine remorse. But there was none. It was a masterclass in manipulation. "Look how much we've suffered. Look how hard it's been. You were right. We were wrong. Now come back and fix it." She didn't miss me. She missed my money. She wasn't sorry for hurting me. She was sorry she got caught. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. The old Emma would have cried. The old Emma would have felt a surge of guilt, a powerful tug of obligation to rush back and make everything better. But the old Emma was gone. I walked into my home office and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. I placed the letter inside, next to my company's and corporation documents, and the deed to my house. Maybe one day I would write back. Maybe one day, years from now, we could have a coffee in a neutral place. Maybe, but not yet. And maybe never, because forgiveness is a gift, not an obligation. And after a lifetime of paying everyone else's debts, I was finally learning to save the most valuable things for myself. My peace was no longer for sale. It didn't come cheap, and it was a price I was no longer willing to pay for them. They called me a failure. Now they live off excuses, and I live off the freedom they said I'd never earn. If you've ever been the one holding everyone else together while they tear you down, remember, silence isn't weakness, it's preparation. Comment, "I know my worth," if this story spoke to you. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes the best revenge is living well.